All right, the next day on our back test is this huge day right here, this 11:20, and these two white lines are the high and low of the previous day. We can see those white lines over here on the 1-minute chart, and we can also see them on the 5-minute chart. Let's look at that. Also, this gray box is the 8 o'clock a.m. Sometimes I like to get in a little early, all the way to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, New York session. And that's what we see on the 1 minute as well. So we see the high and low right here, the high and low of yesterday. We see the 8 a.m. session coming. Any news that takes place happens in here, the opening bell. And then we see we're going to look for that fair value gap inside a breaker block situation. All right, let's take a look at the fast moving price action. We see it pop up over the top of the previous day. We see a breaker block situation created when this order block right here was swept down, and then it shoots back up over here, okay? And this is the area we need to look for fair value gaps. And we got one right here, but it never tests it, right? It never tests it. It never comes down to test it. We have another fair value gap right here that was never tested. This is the 5-minute chart. Okay, so that's really tough when things are going so fast that we can't even get into the thing. So let's check and see if there's anything that we might be able to grab. Here's 4 o'clock. It's over. The session's over. So these two massive and beautiful fair value gaps after this bullish breaker block tested the high of the previous day. I mean, this is textbook. The only problem is it just never came down to give us a trade. Now, this is the 5-minute chart. Let's take a look at the 1-minute chart and see if things look a little differently. All right, we have the same price action, but we might be able to see some fair value gaps that take place on this breakout move that could have been tested for us. There are little ones, and like this little one right here, that one wasn't even tested. All right, there's this little one right here, and it held up in a range on that. Here's one right here. It never came back down, and we start to see fair value gaps created right here as it's getting ready to break out. Right now, this one actually holds. If you wanted to trust that and not wait for a pullback, sometimes when it does a move like this and consolidates sideways, it's not going to pull back. If our stop is very small, it's worth getting in at the higher end of the move. A lot of times we really like it to pull back to discount into 50% pullback. But on strong moves like this, here's a fair value gap area that was never tested as well. All right, now here's one that seemed to be towards the end of the day, or let me see when this was. No, here's one that looks like it did pretty good, but man, look how far up it is. There's a gap right here. It comes back and tests it, and it shoots right up. And just look how high up it is, though. And so it's very difficult to take one like that when it's already moved up so high. And it would appear that you really didn't get much of a entry point anywhere, because even these little tiny fractured ones, like there's a fair value gap right here that actually worked. Came right back to it, bounced off of it, and kept right on going, right? That's the cleanest one I have in this whole chart, unless you can see one that I can't see. And then we get a reverse pattern up here at the top. Now, if this was a reverse pattern, if we put in some kind of a sweep of liquidity on a daily chart, well, this is actually the all-time highs in this case. So there is nothing for it to bounce off of. But let's say that it was a previous day high or a 4-hour high or something like that, and it put in this reverse pattern, we would have had a fair value gap short to the downside right here, and we could have went short on that. But you can't do that when it's not sweeping liquidity from something. If this is an all-time high candle here, and it's never been higher than this, there's nothing that it's sweeping. All right, so that would not have worked. I'm just trying to give you an example of how we could reverse it if it did hit some kind of resistance level or did sweep over some pivot point on a higher time chart. Then we could look for that same pattern, look for a fair value gap, look for it to retest it, and short it down to the downside. I have to say that on this particular day, as green as it turned out to be, there just simply was not an entry for us that I could see. And sometimes that happens as well. So at least we didn't lose any money on this day, and that's okay. You got to let it go. You can't force a trade. Either the strategy is going to work or it's not. You can't force a trade. I did forget to mention this one down at the bottom here. It doesn't look like it's coming off of a breaker block though, so that's why I ignored it. But if you could, let's move this out of the way for 1 second here. If we could just see the fair value gap that was created from this big move up. There's an empty space right here that was tested a couple of times and would have worked. But if we're going to be basing it off of a breaker block, then I'm really not sure even how to judge the breaker block in this situation. If I was trying to create one out of my mind, I guess I could go with something like this. A high here, sweeps liquidity down at the bottom, and comes up and creates that big move. That would be a kind of a breaker block situation. You have to have it sweep through the liquidity under here, these stops that are under here, and then displace to the upside, creating a fair value gap. So I'm still new to this. I'm still trying to observe what works, what doesn't work. I'm not even sure, if that's a correct breaker block. It looks like the pattern would fit. And it did create a fair value that did test and would have been the only good entry on this whole entire day. And I almost overlooked it. So I wanted to throw that in the video as well, make sure that we're not missing anything, because I'm still learning also. Peace.